The sun dipped low over the prairie, casting a golden glow across dry, brittle fields. The wind swept through the tall grasses, turning them into rippling seas that swayed under its relentless push. But for three sisters, Willa, Josie, and Rose, the splendor of the horizon did little to soften the turmoil churning within their hearts. Their father's reckless gambling had cost them everything. They'd lost not only their home, but also their sense of safety. Their futures sold off like scraps. Now, as Jack Wexley's wagon creaked closer, one question echoed in their minds. Would anyone step forward to rescue them? Willa stood by the doorway of their crumbling shack, arms crossed tight against her chest. Her dress was worn thin at the elbows, a testament to years of hardship. Beside her, Josie clutched a satchel filled with small treasures, a cracked mirror, a scrap of their mother's shawl, and a notebook full of poems no one had ever read. Rose, the youngest, sat on the porch steps, her wide eyes scanning the horizon like a trapped bird searching for escape. Behind them, the house groaned under years of neglect. Dust coated every surface, and silence pressed heavily against the walls. No laughter lived there anymore, only ghosts. Their mother's grave lay out back, marked by a river stone and a ring of wildflowers Willa tended every Sunday with trembling hands. The flowers were wilting now, their petals brittle under the relentless sun, much like the family spirit. Their father shuffled inside, his face slack with shame he was too proud to name. Once he'd been strong and admired, his voice rising like a hymn over morning dew. But gambling debts had stripped him bare, leaving behind a man hollowed out by regret and desperation. His hands, once calloused from honest work, now trembled as he reached for the bottle hidden beneath the warped floorboards. Each sip seemed to carve deeper lines into his weathered face, erasing what little remained of the man he used to be. When Jack Wexley stepped down from the wagon, his boots thudded like falling stones. He was a mountain of a man, greed etched into every line of his face. His eyes slid over the girls like cattle at market, cold and calculating. The brim of his hat cast a shadow that seemed to swallow the light around him, and the silver buckle on his belt gleamed menacingly in the sun. Their father didn't look at them as he shook Jack's hand, a brutal clasp between men who had lost their way long ago. The exchange was brief, almost mechanical, but it carried the weight of a life sentence. Willa watched as her father's shoulders sagged further. His head bowed as though the sky itself had collapsed onto him. "Come along, girls," Jack said, his voice slick with false kindness. "Time we got you settled." Willa squeezed Josie's hand, silently vowing to shield her sisters from whatever horrors awaited them. Rose pressed her fist to her chest, fighting tears. Together, they climbed into the wagon without looking back. The air around them seemed heavier now, thick with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. Each creak of the wagon's wheels carried the weight of what they left behind: their home, their memories, their fragile sense of safety. Willa stared straight ahead, her jaw set firm, while Josie clung to her side, whispering prayers under her breath. Rose curled into herself, her tiny frame shaking as though bracing for an unseen storm. Jack's shadow loomed over them, blocking out the sun, his presence a constant reminder of the life that awaited. It wasn't freedom or hope, but something darker, something none of them could yet fully comprehend. Still, Willa vowed silently that no matter how far they traveled or how difficult the road became, she would protect her sisters, even if it meant facing the devil himself. As the wagon rumbled forward, the shack disappeared behind a veil of dust. Willa felt the ache of loss settle deep within her chest, mingling with anger and determination. She glanced at Josie, whose knuckles were white from gripping the satchel, and then at Rose, whose silent tears glistened in the fading sunlight. In that moment, Willa understood the true meaning of sacrifice. Whatever came next, she would bear it for them. Days turned into weeks at Jack's sprawling ranch, where the air felt thick with tension. The house was grand but hollow, its high ceilings trapping echoes of laughter long extinguished. Every room seemed to breathe unease, the polished wood floors reflecting not warmth, but the cold calculation of those who now ruled their lives. Clara, Jack's sister, ruled the household with cold precision, her sharp eyes measuring the girls' every move. Her presence was as suffocating as the heavy drapes that blocked out the sunlight, leaving the rooms perpetually dim and oppressive. "You'll be clean. You'll be obedient. You'll be grateful," she snapped one morning, her voice brittle as winter branches snapping underfoot. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, watching as Willa scrubbed dishes until her hands were raw. Josie sat nearby, mending a torn dress with trembling fingers, while Rose swept the floor with clumsy, uneven strokes. "Grateful," Willa muttered under her breath, though she kept her face carefully neutral. Gratitude was the last thing she felt. Instead, there was anger, a slow-burning fire that smoldered deep within her chest. It fueled her resolve, even as exhaustion threatened to pull her under. Willa kept her chin high, refusing to let fear show. Josie found solace in sewing tiny stitches into handkerchiefs, each stitch a silent promise to endure. The delicate patterns she created became her refuge, a way to hold on to something beautiful amidst the ugliness surrounding them. Rose, still so young and soft, cried quietly into her pillow at night, dreaming of the freedom they had left behind. Sometimes, Willow would hear her youngest sister's muffled sobs through the thin walls and feel her own heart crack just a little more. Jack came and went like a storm cloud, his presence suffocating. At dinner, he watched them eat, his small eyes glinting in the candlelight. His chair scraped against the floor as he leaned back, chewing slowly, deliberately, as if savoring not just the food but the power he held over them. "You're getting prettier by the day," he once said, wiping grease from his mouth with a silk napkin. His words dripped with insincerity, laced with an undertone that made Willa's skin crawl. "Worth every penny I paid." Willa lowered her gaze, her jaw tightening. She focused on the chipped edge of her plate, willing herself not to react. Josie forced a smile that hurt to see, an attempt to mask the fear bubbling beneath the surface. And Rose? She stared at her plate, her knuckles white around her fork, her small frame rigid with tension. None of them dared to speak unless spoken to, each word weighed and measured before it passed their lips. But even in the darkest moments, hope flickered, small, fragile, yet stubbornly alive. In the kitchens, they met Ruthie, a kind-hearted woman whose quiet acts of rebellion kept their spirits alive. Ruthie moved through the house like a shadow, unnoticed by Clara or Jack, slipping warm biscuits into their hands when no one was looking. Her hands were rough from years of labor, but her touch was gentle as she pressed a biscuit into Willa's palm one evening. "For strength," Ruthie whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of pots and pans. Her eyes, lined with age and weariness, held a spark of defiance. "Don't let him break you, child. Not all of us can fight, but we can stand together." Willa nodded, clutching the biscuit tightly as though it might crumble if she loosened her grip. Later, she shared it with Josie and Rose, breaking it into 3 pieces. They ate in silence, the simple act of sharing food somehow binding them closer, reminding them of what they still had, each other. At night, when the house fell silent and the weight of the day pressed down on them, Willa lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about escape, not just for herself, but for Josie and Rose. There had to be a way out of this prison disguised as a home. Each creak of the floorboards outside their door made her heart race, but she forced herself to stay calm, to think clearly. Josie sometimes whispered stories to Rose before bed, tales of faraway lands and brave heroines who triumphed against impossible odds. Rose listened wide-eyed, clinging to the words like a lifeline. Even Willa found comfort in these stories, imagining herself as the heroine who saved her family from the darkness closing in around them. And so, day by day, they endured. The days were long, filled with chores and scrutiny, but the nights belonged to them. In the quiet hours, they dreamed of freedom, not just physical freedom, but the freedom to laugh without fear, to live without shame. Willa vowed silently that someday, somehow, they would find it. Until then, they would survive. Together. One evening, Jack gathered the girls in the parlor. "3 guests are coming tomorrow," he announced, his voice slick with anticipation. He leaned back in his chair, a cigar clutched between his fingers, smoke curling lazily toward the ornate ceiling. "Good men, men of means. Behave yourselves. Might be you charm one of them." His words hung heavy in the air, laced with implication and expectation. The sisters exchanged wary glances, their hearts sinking further into the pit of dread that had become their constant companion. When the brothers arrived the next afternoon, the room seemed to shift, as though the very atmosphere had been altered by their presence. Charles Morgan was tall and lean, his face carved by sun and wind, his pale eyes steady as winter skies. There was a quiet strength about him, an unspoken authority that didn't demand attention, but commanded it nonetheless. Thomas, broader and warmer, carried a crooked smile that softened the heaviness in the air. His hands were calloused from work, yet they moved with a grace that suggested kindness rather than brute force. Caleb, the youngest, stood quietly at the edge of the group, his gentle demeanor hiding a fierce determination that simmered just beneath the surface. As Charles's gaze met Willa's, something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, not rescue, but recognition. It was fleeting, barely noticeable to anyone else, yet it struck Willa like a bolt of lightning. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as a piece of property or a burden to bear, but as someone who mattered. Thomas noticed Rose trembling beside her sister and offered a gentle grin, his posture easing into something open and unthreatening. He crouched slightly to meet her eye level, speaking softly enough that only she could hear. "You've got nothing to fear from me," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. Rose blinked up at him, her wide eyes searching his face for any trace of deception. She found none. Caleb lingered near Josie, his quiet presence a balm to her frayed nerves. When she accidentally dropped a spoon during tea, he reached down to retrieve it before she could, handing it back with a small nod and a whisper. "It happens to the best of us," he murmured, his tone light but sincere. Josie managed a shaky smile, clutching the spoon tightly as though it might anchor her to this moment of unexpected kindness. The conversation that followed was stilted, Jack dominating the room with loud boasts and crude laughter. He slapped Charles on the back, his voice booming as he recounted tales of his supposed successes, each word dripping with arrogance. But Charles remained unfazed, his expression calm and measured, his responses polite without being overly ingratiating. Every so often, his gaze would drift back to Willa, lingering just long enough to make her pulse quicken. There was no sense of ownership in his stare, no predatory gleam, but rather a quiet intensity that seemed to memorize her, as if she were a map he would one day follow. Willa tried to focus on the others, forcing herself to engage when necessary, but her thoughts kept circling back to Charles. What did he see when he looked at her? Did he understand the weight of what she carried? The responsibility for her sisters, the scars left by Jack's cruelty? Or was he simply another man, drawn by appearances and circumstance? Thomas, meanwhile, continued to charm Rose with stories of horses and wildflowers, painting vivid pictures of a world beyond the confines of the ranch. He spoke animatedly, his hands gesturing as though he were sketching scenes in the air, fields stretching endlessly under skies painted gold by the setting sun, rivers winding through meadows dotted with bursts of color. His enthusiasm was infectious, and even Rose began to relax, her shoulders losing some of their tension. For the first time in weeks, her wide eyes held something other than fear. They sparkled faintly with curiosity, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Caleb stayed close to Josie, offering subtle gestures of support, a steadying hand when she stumbled, a soft word when her voice faltered. When she accidentally knocked over a glass during tea, his quick reflexes saved it from shattering on the floor. "Easy does it," he murmured, placing it back on the table with a reassuring smile. It wasn't just his actions that comforted her. It was the quiet certainty in his presence, the way he seemed to instinctively know when she needed strength or silence. Josie found herself stealing glances at him, marveling at how effortlessly he carried kindness in a place where cruelty reigned. Despite Jack's attempts to control the narrative, there was an undercurrent in the room that he couldn't touch. The brothers brought with them a sense of possibility, however faint, that hadn't existed before. They weren't saviors, not yet, but they were different. Their voices didn't carry the sharp edge of command or the oily slickness of manipulation. Instead, they spoke with sincerity. Their words weighted not with power but with care. And in a place where difference was rare, it was enough to ignite a spark of hope. Every so often, Charles's gaze would drift toward Willa, lingering just long enough to make her pulse quicken. There was no arrogance in his stare, no sense of ownership or expectation, only a quiet intensity that felt like understanding. Willa caught herself watching him too, noting the way his jaw tightened when Jack laughed too loudly or how his fingers flexed subtly against his knee as though resisting the urge to intervene. Whatever his intentions, whatever plan he had brewing beneath his calm exterior, she couldn't deny the shift in the atmosphere whenever he was near. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a whisper of what could be. Later that night, as the sisters lay huddled together in their shared bedroom, the events of the day replayed in their minds. The mattress beneath them sagged in the middle, its springs creaking softly with each movement. Outside, crickets chirped steadily, their song blending with the distant hoot of an owl. The house was silent now, save for the occasional groan of aging wood settling into the cool night air. "Do you think they'll come again?" Rose whispered, her voice barely audible, as though afraid the walls themselves might overhear. She clutched her blanket tightly around her, her small frame curled into a ball. "I don't know," Willa replied, staring at the cracked plaster of the ceiling. Her mind raced, torn between caution and the fragile tendrils of optimism beginning to take root. She traced the cracks with her eyes, imagining them as paths leading somewhere far away. "But if they do," she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. What would happen if the brothers returned? Would they bring more promises? More plans? Or would they vanish like a mirage, leaving behind only disappointment? Josie reached out, her hand finding Willa's in the dark. Her fingers were cold, but steady as she squeezed gently. "We'll figure it out," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. Together, the weight of her words settled over them, grounding them in the reality of their bond. They had survived this long because of each other, because they had refused to let go, even when the world tried to pry them apart. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Willa believed her. Not because Josie's words erased the fear or uncertainty. They didn't, but because they reminded her of who they were. Survivors, fighters, sisters. In the quiet moments that followed, Willa allowed herself to imagine what might lie ahead. She pictured open fields bathed in sunlight, laughter echoing freely without the shadow of Jack looming overhead. She saw Rose running barefoot through wildflowers, Josie sewing intricate patterns under the shade of an oak tree, and herself standing tall, unburdened by the weight of constant vigilance. It was a dream, fragile and fleeting, but it was theirs. Beside her, Josie hummed softly, a tune their mother used to sing when they were children. Rose joined in hesitantly, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each note. Willa closed her eyes, letting the melody wrap around her like a cocoon. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like enough. Tomorrow would bring challenges. They all knew that. But tonight, in the safety of their shared space, they let themselves rest. Together. That night, Ruthie slipped a note into Willa's pocket as she passed her in the hallway. Smokehouse. Sundown. The paper was thin, almost translucent, and the words were scrawled hastily but clearly. Willa tucked it deep into her apron, her fingers brushing against the fragile edges as though afraid it might disintegrate. Her heart raced, not just from the risk of discovery, but from a flicker of possibility that now burned brighter than ever before. It was a spark, a tiny ember, that refused to be extinguished, even in the suffocating darkness of Jack's rule. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to breathe steadily, though her pulse thundered in her ears like a drumbeat calling her to action. When sundown finally came, the sisters moved like shadows through the sprawling grounds of Jack's ranch. They avoided the lantern-lit paths, sticking to the darker corners where the trees stretched their gnarled branches toward the sky. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and pine needles, and every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, felt impossibly loud. Willa led the way, her steps deliberate yet cautious, each movement calculated to avoid detection. Josie followed closely behind, clutching Rose's hand tightly, her knuckles white with tension. Rose, the youngest, walked silently, her wide eyes darting nervously at every creak of the wooden fence or snap of a twig underfoot. Each breath they took seemed to echo in the stillness, a reminder of how precarious their situation was. The smokehouse loomed ahead, its weathered walls sagging under years of neglect. The structure seemed to lean slightly, as if weary from bearing witness to secrets long buried. Inside, Charles, Thomas, and Caleb waited, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light filtering through cracks in the wooden planks. Charles stepped forward first, his tall frame filling the doorway as he ushered them inside. "We want to help," he said, his voice low and steady, each word carrying the weight of a promise. "We'll find a way to get you out. When it's safe, when you're ready." He handed Willa a battered tin containing wire, flint, and a folded scrap of map. She opened it carefully, her hands trembling slightly as she examined the contents. The map was worn at the creases, marked with faint lines and symbols she didn't fully understand yet. Still, it felt like a lifeline, a tangible piece of hope in a world that had tried so hard to crush them. She traced her fingers over the faded ink, imagining the roads and rivers leading to freedom. The flint felt rough against her skin, a reminder of the tools they would need to survive. Wire coiled neatly in one corner of the tin, gleaming faintly in the dim light. Every item seemed to whisper of possibilities, of plans waiting to unfold. Thomas knelt beside Rose, speaking softly as he steadied her trembling hands. "You're stronger than you think," he told her, his crooked smile softening the gravity of the moment. "And we're here for you, every step of the way." Rose nodded, though tears glistened in her wide eyes. She clutched the edge of his sleeve, as if anchoring herself to something solid amidst the chaos. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that someone cared, not because they were obligated, but because they truly wanted to. His presence was warm and reassuring, a stark contrast to the coldness of a life they had known under Jack's roof. Caleb stood near Josie, his quiet presence offering reassurance without needing words. "I'll protect you," he promised, his tone simple but sincere. "No matter what happens, I won't let anything hurt you." Josie looked up at him, her lips parting as though she wanted to say something. But instead, she simply nodded, gratitude shining in her gaze. His calm demeanor was a balm to her frayed nerves, and for a fleeting moment, she felt safe. Caleb's silence wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken strength, a quiet vow that spoke louder than any words could. From that moment on, the brothers returned often, always careful, always watching. Notes hidden in books, stolen conversations in the stables, all part of a plan taking shape in the shadows. Each meeting brought them closer to freedom, though the danger grew with every passing day. Jack's temper had grown shorter, his suspicion sharper, and the girls knew they couldn't stay much longer. His eyes lingered on them during meals, calculating, probing, as though trying to uncover some hidden truth. Clara's icy glares followed them everywhere, her sharp tongue lashing out whenever they faltered. Every glance, every whispered word between the sisters was laden with tension, the stakes higher than ever. Then came the night of Jack's grand party. The house buzzed with laughter and music, guests spilling onto the veranda as champagne flowed freely. Clara flitted between rooms, her sharp eyes missing nothing, or so she thought. But even she couldn't see the silent signals exchanged across crowded tables or the small gestures that set everything into motion. A nod from Charles, a glance from Willa, a whispered word from Ruthie as she passed by. As the clock struck 11, the sisters slipped away one by one, blending into the chaos of the celebration before disappearing into the darkness beyond the garden. Their hearts pounded in unison as they ran through the dew-soaked grass, the cold night air biting at their cheeks. Ahead, the old mill loomed like a sentinel, its silhouette jagged against the starlit sky. The wind carried the faint strains of music from the house, a haunting reminder of the life they were leaving behind. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by memories of hardship and loss, but also buoyed by the hope of what lay ahead. Charles, Thomas, and Caleb were waiting by the river, their horses tethered nearby. The animals shifted restlessly, their breaths forming clouds in the chilly air. Without hesitation, Willa took Charles's hand as he helped her mount his horse, her fingers curling around his briefly before letting go. Josie climbed onto Thomas's horse, gripping the saddle tightly as he adjusted the reins for her. Rose clung tightly to Caleb, burying her face in his coat as he urged the horse forward. They rode hard into the night, the rhythmic pounding of hooves echoing like a heartbeat against the silence of the wilderness. Behind them, the river whispered farewell, its waters reflecting the moonlight in rippling patterns. Ahead stretched the unknown, a rough road fraught with danger, uncertainty, and the fragile hope of a new beginning. The forest closed in around them, dense and shadowy, yet somehow less oppressive than the walls of the ranch they had left behind. Willa glanced over her shoulder once, catching a glimpse of the ranch fading into the distance. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what they were leaving behind, the fear, the oppression, the life that had nearly broken them. She thought of Ruthie, who had risked everything to guide them this far, and of their father, whose pride had cost them so dearly. She thought of their mother's grave, marked only by a river stone and wildflowers, and wondered if she would ever return to tend it again. But then she turned back, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. And this time, they wouldn't be alone. The wind whipped past them, carrying the scent of wild sage and freedom. Each stride of the horses carried them further from the shadows of their past and closer to the light of a future they could scarcely imagine, but one they were determined to build. Together, the stars above seemed brighter now, scattered across the vast expanse of sky like promises waiting to be fulfilled. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out, its cry piercing the night but no longer frightening. It felt like a sign, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always a path forward. As the hours passed and the miles stretched behind them, Willa felt something shift within her. It wasn't just relief or gratitude, it was resolve. She tightened her grip on the reins, her posture straightening as she leaned into the rhythm of the horse's movements. Beside her, Josie sat quietly, her shoulders relaxing slightly as exhaustion began to overtake her fear. Behind them, Rose rested her head against Caleb's back, her breathing evening out as sleep claimed her. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Willa believed they could face it. They had endured the worst life had to offer, and they had risen above it. Together, they had escaped the cage, and now they would carve a new life from the wilderness. One step at a time. By dawn, they reached the Morgan Ranch, a modest place made beautiful by its simplicity. Nestled against rolling hills and framed by towering oak trees, it wasn't grand or rich, it was free. The air smelled of fresh hay and wild sage, and the horizon stretched endlessly before them, painted in hues of gold and lavender as the sun rose higher. Birds chirped their morning songs, and the soft rustle of leaves whispered promises of peace. Charles stood beside Willa as she gazed at the house, her throat too tight to speak. Her fingers brushed absently against the folds of her dress, still damp from the night's journey. She felt the weight of everything they had endured settle around her shoulders, but for the first time, it didn't feel crushing. It felt like proof that they had survived. "It's not much," Charles said quietly, his voice steady yet tinged with vulnerability. "But it's ours, and you're welcome to make it yours, too." His words hung in the crisp morning air, simple yet profound. Willa turned to look at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt or hesitation. She found none, only sincerity, a quiet determination that mirrored her own. For a moment, she couldn't find the words to respond, so she simply nodded, her lips curving into a small, grateful smile. Over time, the sisters healed. Each day brought new routines, new rhythms that slowly stitched the frayed edges of their lives back together. Willa found strength in working alongside Charles, mending fences and taming colts. There was something grounding about the physical labor, the way her hands moved steadily, purposefully, shaping chaos into order. Together, they repaired not just fences but pieces of themselves, learning to trust again, one splintered board at a time. Josie thrived in the garden, her laughter blooming like wildflowers. She planted seeds with care, nurturing them until they grew into vibrant bursts of color that brightened even the grayest days. Her sewing skills flourished here as well. She began crafting quilts from scraps of fabric, each patch telling a story of resilience and hope. Rose rediscovered joy, singing songs that floated on the breeze. Her voice carried across the fields, light and lilting, weaving melodies that seemed to dance with the sunlight. When Charles proposed under the golden prairie sky, Willa slid the plain, silver ring onto her finger without hesitation. It wasn't ornate or flashy. It didn't need to be. Its simplicity spoke volumes, a quiet testament to the life they were building together. Days later, Thomas knelt before Josie with a daisy chain, his crooked grin softening the nervous tremor in his hands. "I promise to make you laugh every day of our lives," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Josie giggled through her tears, nodding eagerly as she accepted the makeshift crown of flowers. Caleb, shy but earnest, gave Rose a ring crafted from twisted silver, its design unique and delicate. He held her hand gently, his gaze unwavering as he vowed to stand by her side forever. "You're braver than you know," he told her, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I'll spend the rest of my life reminding you of that." Their weddings were simple affairs, held in a meadow surrounded by friends. Sheriff Lawson officiated, his sternness softened by affection for these survivors turned dreamers. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, punctuated by laughter and tears. Ruthie, who had secretly traveled to witness the occasion, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, her presence a reminder of the kindness that had helped pave their path to freedom. As the lanterns winked out and the stars filled the sky, Willow leaned into Charles's embrace, feeling the rhythm of their hearts beating as one. The cool night air wrapped around them like a blanket, and a distant sound of crickets provided a soothing backdrop. Somewhere nearby, Josie and Thomas twirled under the moonlight, their laughter carrying on the breeze, while Caleb and Rose sat close together, sharing quiet whispers beneath a canopy of stars. "Do you think it's possible?" Willa asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Her voice was barely audible, carried away almost instantly by the wind. To be broken and whole at the same time. Charles traced slow circles on her arm, his touch warm and grounding. He thought for a moment before answering, choosing his words carefully. "Being broken just means you've lived," he said finally, his tone thoughtful. "Being whole means you kept going anyway." She smiled, warmth filling her chest despite the chill in the air. Tomorrow would bring challenges. They all knew that. Life on the ranch wouldn't always be easy, and the scars they carried might never fully fade. But tonight, they had everything they needed: love, hope, and a future carved from fields of gold under a tomorrow's sky. And somewhere the stars sang, not with weeping, but with rejoicing. They shimmered brightly overhead, their lights stretching infinitely outward, as if celebrating the triumph of three sisters who had dared to dream beyond the cage that once held them. In that moment, Willa realized that freedom wasn't just about escaping what had bound them. It was about finding a place where they could truly belong. And here, beneath this vast prairie sky, they had found it. If you enjoyed this tale of resilience and hope, subscribe now to stay updated on more heartwarming stories of triumph and new beginnings. Don't miss out. Join our community today